Thanks, Cam. Thanks for that interesting introduction. And thank you for being here to listen to me. I think Nuffield's been pretty much a life-changing experience for me. And I've lived this topic now for 2 years. And there's so much in here that I want to get out. It's great to be able to share that with you. The problem for you is going to be getting me to shut up, I think. So first, a few acknowledgements. I really need to thank Rabobank for sponsoring me. Without them, this journey wouldn't have happened. And I've learned a lot about them and truly believe that they're heavily invested in ag, and the trip to the Netherlands to see their headquarters was a real highlight for me. There's so many people who've helped me, and I just think the thing to point out in Nuffield, most of these people I contacted were total strangers. They didn't know me from Adam. And they shared their expertise and their business experience with me, which is unique. And to my family, to Narelle particularly, for being so supportive. It's fantastic to have you all here today to listen to some of the outcomes. So a bit more about my family before I launch into my topic. I'm a fifth-generation farmer from the northern tablelands of New South Wales, along with Narelle, my son Rory, and Darcy, my daughter. We raise sheep and cattle on our 2,200 hectare property northeast of Armidale, and we farm the same piece of land that's been in my family since about 1860. It's a smaller portion, but it's the same piece of land. As you can see from this photo, it's undulating grazing country. On this asset, we breed predominantly Angus cattle. We finish and market their progeny. We also produce fat lambs and some wool. But what's important for the context of my study is who our customers are. So we sell to Coles and Woolies and feedlots. We do not sell direct to the consumer, nor do we have a relationship with them. No discussion about the Australian beef industry can be had without mention of the climate. Though I live in a relatively reliable rainfall area, we still see these extremes of volatility, particularly if you look at summer 14 to 15. Not compared to the NT, I'm sure, but for the industry, the climate really shapes the way we operate in the Australian beef industry. We must keep that in context. So what do we really do? At Pointsfield, we harvest sunlight to grow quality pasture to turn into beef. We aim to do this in a sustainable manner. We have a strong focus on grazing management and the welfare of our animals. But when the consumer goes to buy my product currently at retail, they know none of this. They know nothing about their business or of me. I'm a commodity producer. And that's framed the context of my study. So what was my study topic? Bit of a mouthful, but it's successful models of vertical integration in the beef industry. And I suppose when you look at the industry currently, where producers are receiving the best prices historically they ever had. So why am I even bothering to look at this? And I think you need to go back in time, back to the 13-14 season, when my area received the worst rainfall records in 100 years, coupled with drought up and down the eastern seaboard and into Queensland. This led to massive destocking and hence a collapse in prices. And what this really reinforced to me, even though our business actually was prepared for this, we had a plan, my price is affected by broader market conditions. Didn't matter what I did on farm, I was still affected, and my price is affected by these broader market conditions. So at this same time, when producers were receiving record low prices, the processors and exporters were receiving into 14-15 the best prices they'd ever received. Fast forward to 15-16 to 2017, and the producers are receiving the best prices ever, and the processors are feeling the pain. In some situations cutting shifts, and in others actually shutting plants. So I started to ask, as an industry, how do we deal with this volatility, this boom-bust cycle? Because none of us in the supply chain can run a really consistently profitable business. The relationship with the consumer is changing. Consumers want to know more about where their food comes from and how it's produced. At the same time, as a producer, I've got better ways to communicate with these consumers via social media. Retail is also changing in that context. Amazon has been mentioned. There's other models, delivery models like Instacart, are changing the way that the consumers are getting their products. How do I, as a beef producer, take advantage of this? And there's quite a lot of industry issues in the beef industry at present around transparency and trust in the supply chain. It's at an all-time low. And we just had an ACCC inquiry into the industry. But no matter what the findings are of that inquiry, for a supply chain to integrate, trust and transparency is critical, so we need to address this. So where did I go and what did I look at? It's a big topic, so I've looked at it from the producer's view, integrating up the supply chain. I went to the USA, Brazil, New Zealand and Uruguay, then as part of my GFP was also in Japan and Indonesia. Mostly other big exporters, but also with big domestic beef consumption populations. And what I found out was that there were three primary models that producers were using to integrate up the chain. But just before I mention that, I spoke to the whole range of industry, right from producer through to retailer and all the components in between. So those three critical models were those that chose to partner. They retained what they did, had an overview of the supply chain, but that was as far as their commitment went. Contracted supply chains, where the producer actually retained ownership right up to the point of retail, but contracted all the elements of the supply chain out, and those that wanted to own the whole show. So to illustrate model one, the partner model, I met with Atkins Lamb. Now Atkins Lamb started out as a group of producers taking their product through to retail and has morphed into more of a marketing company based in the west coast of the US. All its lamb comes from New Zealand, and Atkins has really key elements around its brand that link back to the producers that make their product. It focuses on the natural advantages that New Zealand has for producing a grass-fed product and the health advantages of grass-fed meat. And I guess the most important thing to point out is that in-market presence in their key market in the US. So I met with Bill and Sue Garland in Cambridge, New Zealand, and actually drafted and loaded their lambs, as you do as a good lamb and beef producer. And Bill explained to me that what was important to him was the guarantee he got of kill space, the clear specs that he had to hit, and then the premiums he was going to receive if he did that. Now, Bill and Sue both understood the commitment they had undertaken to fulfil this supply chain. They had to meet the global animal partnership standards that underpinned Whole Foods branding, and this also underpinned Atkins Ranch brand as well. I then followed these lambs to Progressive Meats, which is where all Atkins lamb is processed, and I met the owner, Craig Hickson. Now, Craig showed me this grid, which is really unique compared to the Australian industry. It gives total transparency, and you see at the top of the kill cost as well. So he was really focusing on being transparent about his business to the producer as well. The other key part for Craig was the producers gave forward commitment of what they would supply for their season, so he could better plan his business around that as well. I then went to Fremont, California, met with James McWilliam, the VP of Marketing for Atkins, and he explained how important that brand control was. So on the left you can see that's how Atkins Ranch product is displayed in a Whole Foods meat cabinet. On the right, this is the same store, but that was in California, this was in New York, and this is where they want to head. All their brand claims, all the standards are clearly communicated on the packaging, but they maintain that relationship with the customer. So what were the risks and rewards of this model? I mean, firstly, it was low risk for all the participants. Okay, you've got less invested, you don't have to buy other elements of the supply chain, you have to just have an overview of them, and you continue to do pretty much what you were doing. This is a risk though, because that reduced commitment means you don't have any ownership of the other elements' supply chain. And it's good if you want to get out, but what a processor needs to do if you're looking up the chain is guarantee that supply, so it doesn't mitigate that risk for them. It's flexible. If you have one partner fail, you can find another to replace it. However, for a producer, and I'm looking at a producer view, you're still a price taker, which is the key to the commodity model. So I met with this man, Wes Davies, who works for Country Natural Beef, which was a good example of the contracted out model. That company was established in 1982 as an attempt to move away from commodity production, but its ethos was more about sustainability of the land, and also they wanted to sustain 6 generations of farmers into the future. Everything that these guys did, aside from production, the cow-calf raising, was contracted out. And the key elements, so it was a co-op with about 80 producers, and apart from production, as I said, everything was contracted out. That's the killing, the handling, holding the retail beef in rented chillers, right through to distribution. And the most interesting point about their model was they didn't own any assets whatsoever, but they funded the entire model by cash flow. So the producer received 60% of their income when the cattle went to the processing plant. They had to wait, like any co-op model, for the remaining 40% till the end of that first 12 months. So this gave them that commitment of supply. But the key thing about these guys, they tried to build their price based on cost of production. So they averaged the cost of production across those 80 producers and then said to the retailer, this is our base price, we're going to mark that up. That was pretty unique, I thought. It did tend to favour the bigger producers with lower cost of production, but as a real attempt to build sustainability into their pricing. Like Atkins, they had clear elements, clear audible standards around their brand, also the global animal partnership standards. So what were the risks and rewards of this model? Continued ownership is a strength, but it's also a risk. You're now in the fresh food business, okay? They had a retail perishable product they had to deal with. Brand control, by taking the product right through and retaining that ownership, they control that relationship of their brand and the interface with the consumer and their ability to set price. The model is flexible. Wes said to me, if things went pear-shaped tomorrow, they could shut down that entire supply chain, liquidate all that product on the commodity market, and the producers wouldn't go out of business. That was important for them. It was low cap, but you needed the cash flow to fund this. So if there was an issue with the supplier not paying, it was a huge risk to their supply chain. So the final model I mentioned, owning the chain, I went to visit this business, which is Ranch Food Directs and Callicrate Beef. I met with Mike Callicrate. He's the owner. He's based in Kansas and he's got a retail store in Colorado. Mike was originally a feedlotter, and he's gone ahead and basically built his own entire supply chain, right from owning the animals. He has a feedlot, he's got a processing works, he's got a wholesale distribution centre and a point of retail. And now the business, as I said, Mike was originally a feedlotter, but he's now got the skills, or learnt the skills to manage the entire supply chain, and there were some opportunities for cross-subsidisation in that model. This is the inside of Mike's processing facility. It was quite small scale, was only designed to slaughter about 20 herd per day. And as you can see, that's actually a truck body. It was originally designed to be mobile. There were some issues around that, and what Mike did is actually now houses that in a dedicated facility. The chilled carcasses are then transferred from this site to the wholesale and portioning centre. It was really interesting. Mike made the point that though he now owns all these elements of the supply chain, the riskiest business was still in the cow-calf production side. Here's the retail store in Colorado Springs. Now, Colorado Springs, I think it's 450,000 people in Colorado Springs. That's only, I think, an hour from his farm. And then Denver is only an hour and a half away, which is the fastest growing city in the US. This was key to his model. He could keep that local production story and have access to over 1 million customers within 2 hours. His brand message was really strong, and it was more about what they didn't do to their beef rather than what they did to it. No HGPs, no solutions, no additives. So the risks and rewards of this model, obviously you've got the most control. You own the whole thing. You've got that direct link with the customer. You can set the price. However, you've got all these assets, so that's a risk. But when I looked at that, though it was a risk, it also gave you that ability to cross-subsidise. So if things were pretty bad in production, you were still making money at retail because you were setting the price. But this model required the most skills to make it work. So what did I learn from all this? What were the outcomes? Basically, there's no magic formula to make this work, and the term model was a little bit misleading. It assumes there is some sort of a formula, but it really depended on what your resources were, your skills, your target market. So I think it's really important to take that away. There is no one model that fits all. Before I talk about supply chains and value chains, I did identify that there were these 5 key things that all these businesses did. Now, I only chose 3 examples. I spoke to 45 different businesses, and most of those fulfilled these 5 common elements. But I'm not plagiarising Don's speech from the other night, but every business I spoke to mentioned they were part of a value chain, not a supply chain. And I thought I'd talk about supply chains for a second. It can simply be described as a system of people and of activities that get products and services from producers to consumers. A value chain is a totally different concept. It talks more about ethos, It's more about interdependence rather than independence. And I suppose the whole theory behind a value chain is how do we grow the total pie rather than our individual slice? And all these businesses reflected that. Back to those 5 elements then. So common vision was crucial. It had to be shared by all the participants of the supply chain. Strong brand was great, but it had to be auditable. Those consumers can find out at a click of a button more about your business than you may want to accept. Brand interface with consumers was key. The supply commitment, you've built this beast, you've now got to have throughput, and you need the skills to manage this supply chain, which is crucial. Other key learnings, and Luke touched on this, listen, export, like there's successful models out there, but export is a huge challenge. All the businesses I spoke to that were doing this well had access to large domestic populations or large domestic consumer bases. So in the US, over 80% of their production in beef is consumed domestically. In Australia, that's less than 20%. In New Zealand, it's as low as 15%. This just adds a whole layer of complexity to get your message to the customer, to even get your product to the customer. So it tends to favour large-scale models, and there's a lot more geopolitical risk. And we've all seen the live export shutdown. If something like that happens, you've got some serious issues. And I just want to touch again on the fact that retail is changing. We talked about Amazon, and I looked, like Matt didn't get a meeting with Jeff, but I looked at their model in more detail. And what you see in Amazon is a logistics expert getting into the food business. Like Coles and Woolies are doing food delivery. Their biggest competitor, Kroger's in the US, from point of click to fulfilment of order took an hour. Amazon can do that in 15 minutes. So they're going to be a game changer, and how we fit into their supply chains is a real opportunity, I think. And finally, I just want to talk about the opportunity for grass-fed meat. Though we need a feedlot industry in Australia to maintain consistent production because of the volatility of our climate, what do cows do really well? They eat grass. And monogastrics can't do that. So if we can harness that opportunity, it's a great story. And right now in the US, it's a huge market. In overall decreasing beef consumption, that category is growing at 200% per year. The same opportunity exists in China and other Asian countries. So my recommendations, the industry's kind of doing this already. We know we've got to target premium markets. But the second point is, as a producer, what is it that I do that's valuable? Valuable on farm, and then what's the value to the consumer? We need to know that to be able to communicate it. There are partnering options available already in the market, but producers need to understand what do they want to do. You could continue in the commodity production business, and as I said, right now, the prices are good, but long term, particularly places like Brazil can produce beef a lot cheaper than we can, and we've got to focus on selling our value. And transparency. I haven't got any answers for this, but we've got to focus on the customer. And right now, actually, my customer is a feedlot. So I shouldn't be fighting with those guys or with Coles and Woolies. We've got to be working together with that customer experience in mind. So for my business, we're going to focus on building our own brand. We do want to go direct to the consumer, but I view the partner model as being the least risk model to doing that. So that's what we're going to focus on. And as Nuffield tends to throw at you, I've actually taken on a new role. So in leaving my business, we set things up so I could go away. Those guys are now doing way better than I was doing when I was in the business. So I've now taken a role with an investment company who manage beef properties around Australia, and they're looking to me to help them build their supply chain. So I'll get some lessons through that, and I might even use that model to supply my beef into. So I just want to finish on this slide. Why do we do what we want to do? And I don't know if you know the business speaker and author Simon Sinek, and he talks about the why of business, not the what of business, and talks about how if you can get consumers to buy into the why, you've got a customer for life. And I just want to finish talking about why I do and why we do what we do. So my family truly enjoys raising animals, and we believe that we're custodians of the land for future generations. I believe that grazing animals are a sustainable way to produce food, and to be honest with you, it's the best use of our current asset, growing that grass. So when we communicate our value, those are the things I'll be talking about to my customers. Thanks very much for your time.